Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi and welcome back to That Trippi Show. So if you've listened to this podcast regularly, you know one of our recurring themes is that the Republican Party is now owned completely by Donald Trump and his MAGA base, and that what used to be the grand old party is no more. Our guest today has covered Donald Trump far longer than most. His new book, Tired of Winning, Donald Trump and the End of the Grand Old Party, is an amazing read, documented and complete with footnotes. This book should raise the alarm of what is coming if Trump wins the 2024 election. Like no other book I've read this year. One big hint: the launch of Trump's 2024 campaign in Waco, Texas, was no accident. We face conspiracies, fascism, and a candidate detached from reality. We're going to talk about it all with our special guest today, Chief Washington Correspondent for ABC News and author of Tired of Winning, Jonathan Karl. And I just want to say this: Karl is the best in the business. Tough, fair, brutally honest.
Hey, well said. Well said, Joe.
And I'm not the first to say that, Jonathan. Jonathan explained, I'm sure. Jonathan, welcome.
Hey, Joe, thank you for having me. Yeah, those were the words of Donald Trump back in 1994. Words that I wrote for Donald Trump, actually, but it's a long story. It's in the book. It's all...
Yeah, one of my inside jokes was going to be, and you didn't write those words for me, but I figured that might go over people's heads. You know, Jonathan and I go back a long way, presidential politics and everything else, but you've got to have covered this guy just about longer than anybody. He started in the New York Post, which is where you were when you wrote that quote for him, the blurb for your book. The book is amazing in terms of just the change between 2020 and now. But what was it like then and compared to now? I mean, can you explain to the audience a little bit?
I mean, first of all, I was a reporter at the New York Post, and I'd written my first book, which I thought was not a Trump book. Although now in hindsight, it looks like it actually is, in a very real way, a Trump book. But in a measure of how seriously I took Donald Trump's endorsement of my book, I had sent him the manuscript and asked for a blurb, not to go on the book itself, but to go on the invitation to my book party as kind of a joke, But it was a book about the rise of right-wing militias after the disaster in Waco with the Trump Davidians and after the Oklahoma City bombing. So, like I said, I didn't think it was a book that had anything to do with Donald Trump, but there his name is prominently on the invitation. I still have an original copy of an invitation because my dad had stuffed it away in a file of all my stuff, probably a couple of my high school papers too. I mean, I couldn't believe that thing was still around. But look, I was a young reporter for the New York Post, kind of having the time of my life as a reporter. I mean, you break a story for the Post and, the headlines, if the story was big enough, I mean, my God, you'd dominate the town for the following day. And I did get to know Trump pretty well back then, and I never thought that he was going to be a political figure in any context, let alone president of the United States.
Do you think he did?
I don't think so. I mean, he had the grand ego, but the grand ego was part of the marketing plan. It was, that's how he did that was his shtick. That was how he marketed what he did, is that he was the biggest, the best, the greatest, had all the solutions for everything. That was his marketing pitch when he was going through the first of 6 bankruptcies. It was just an amazing ability to say that he was a master of business at a time when he was literally bankrupt.
The thing that's amazing, again, given that blurb was for your first book, looking at Waco, and then in this book, which is your third, over the Trump years, I think.
Yes.
But this book really starts, for me, and it is early in the book, with his choosing Waco as his announcement, his launch of the 2024 campaign. And it's pretty revealing. I think this story, if you can relate it a little bit, is Just sort of sets up where we're headed in terms of why they chose that, and Steve Bannon's remarks and other things in that section of the book is just amazing to me.
I mean, it really does. It's so important in the story, and I think vital to understanding what this election is all about. He chose as the venue for the very first rally of his 2024 campaign, Waco, Texas. Now, Joe, you know a thing or two about the primary process. You know, in announcing a presidential campaign, one might choose a location that is
Des Moines, Iowa.
I mean, Des Moines might work, New Hampshire might work, these days South Carolina could work, or maybe some location that has some personal ties to the candidate, tells a story. I mean, this is Waco. This is Texas. First of all, you don't launch in Texas. It has absolutely no relevance to the Republican primary process, and it doesn't even have much relevance to the general election. If you were, looking ahead, it's Texas, and then it just happens to be Waco, Texas. And when the venue was announced, the Trump campaign spokesperson said, "Oh, it was just because it was a good location, very close to a lot of big cities." But I called up Steve Bannon and I said, I mean, what the hell is going on here? I mean, first of all, Waco, as you know, 1993, the Branch Davidians, David Koresh's cult, Mount Carmel is their compound. They are suspected of compiling weapons and explosives. So the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, goes on a raid, and they end up holding out, and there ends up being this 51-day siege of the compound that ends with federal agents going in and a massive inferno of the entirety of Mount Carmel, and everybody, 80 plus people dying. It was a total disaster in every sense of the word and it was an example. The Branch Davidians were a cult. They weren't obeying the law, all of that. They probably set the fire, or some of them did, that caused all the deaths at that moment. But this was obviously also a disaster for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the FBI, which took part in the raid, federal marshals. It was just a terrible example of a federal law enforcement operation gone terribly wrong, and it became the symbol for the militia movement that I wrote about in that book, that first book that actually was published in 1995. It was the inspiration in many ways for Timothy McVeigh when he went exactly 2 years to the day later, April 19th, 1995, and blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City, which was the deadliest terrorist attack, domestic terrorist attack in the history of America. 168 people killed. So how is it that the former president, who's announcing an attempt to get back into office, is deciding to announce this event at Waco, Texas? And by the way, let's not forget how that rally started, which I don't think got significant attention at all. That rally started with Donald Trump walking out onto the stage silently as the national anthem played. But it wasn't just any version of the national anthem. It was the national anthem as performed by the so-called J6 choir, which were the prisoners arrested for their part in the assault on the Capitol. And he sat there as it played out. Trump has a role in that song. But while he was standing there on the video screens, the massive video screens on each side of the stage, they actually played footage of the attack on the Capitol. So anyway, I called Steve Bannon and I said, "Waco, really? What is going on here?" And he said to me, "What? We are the Trump Davidians."
Yeah, that might be the title of this episode. Because it tells you everything about about their thinking, where they were headed.
It just seems like, and I want to get a lot more into your conversations with Steve Bannon. I mean, buy the book just for that, but fascinating kind of threads woven throughout. But one thing, so he's telling you this, like, he knows you're John Karl. He knows you are a reporter. He knows that is getting out. all of them keep saying stuff like, and we'll get to this too, but like it's coming from the horse's mouth. We're the Trump Davidians, and the whole thing is carefully planned out. You're calling it out. I know Joe does it we do it most weeks, every single week, really. It seems like it has not gotten into the bloodstream, the mainstream kind of commentary on what this campaign is and what he's doing this time, and this change that you talk about.
Yeah, I think it's deeply problematic as we're going into a presidential election where so much is at stake. That some of the discussion is very superficial. Trump's got a huge lead in the polls. Biden's old. These Trump wannabes are getting nowhere. The debates are playing out. He's not showing up. And it's like this kind of as if we're talking about a conventional campaign. And, actually, I think that, look, for this book, 95% probably of the people I spoke to were Republicans, and were Republicans that were close to Trump, supported, some still supporting, like Bannon, Trump. I mean, this is not some, I'm not giving you analysis from Trump's either rhino critics or his Democratic opponents. These are people that know him up close and personal and are in some cases very much in on all of this. And I feel about this book, it is my third Trump book. I never thought I would write more than one. I'm proud of the other two for trying to establish for the historic record what went down. But this one's different for me because I feel an incredible sense of urgency to have people read this book. I don't care how the sales go. I mean, to quote, was it Abby Hoffman, steal this book if you have to. I just want people to read this book to understand what Trump means right now, because I think it is different than 2016. There's a lot of similarities for sure, but there is something different, something more ominous. And I don't think it's fully understood, or even in some cases partially understood.
No, that's what I meant it when we did the intro, that this thing is the most alarming thing I've read because it's so point on, I think. I mean, from everything from, I'd love for you to talk about some of this stuff. The guardrails are gone now. That, there used to be people around him that were out to protect him from himself or protect what he was up to from from harming the country. Those guardrails are gone in terms of how he's preparing for how they're preparing for 2024 if they win. One of the things that struck me in the book was kind of like this sense that unlike kind of Lincoln's team of rivals, it's they're gearing up for a team of sycophants, and I thought the good example of that was a guy named John McEntee. And I thought maybe that would be a good way for you to talk about this, to explain what those final days were like, and then where that leads to what they're trying to do now.
McEntee is an incredibly important figure and too little known and too little understood. And it's both McEntee and what McEntee stands for. I don't know if that he'll literally play the same role the next time around, if there is a next time around for Trump. But if it's not McEntee, it'll be somebody in McEntee's mold. McEntee was the young kid, the guy just out of UConn, where he was a star quarterback. He worked for Fox News for a bit in the newsroom in a very junior role, and then volunteered for the Trump campaign in 2015. He was one of the first people on the campaign. I mean, it was like Corey Lewandowski, Hope Hicks, Scavino, a couple of other people, and this guy Johnny McEntee, and he was just the doing the grunt work, literally carrying the bags for Trump when he traveled. A job that he kept doing when he went to the White House. He was fired by Kelly for issues that came up in his FBI background check, but he was rehired when shortly before Meadows came in as chief of staff in 2020. Actually, I think it was Valentine's Day that he first came in, and he took the the body guy is that job. Yeah. It's sometimes called other things, but the job, and the person that holds this has a desk right outside the Oval Office, because you always have to be there to be ready to go and to take whatever you need to take for the president. So when McEntee came back, he got his desk right back, even though his job was no longer to be the body guy. His job was to be the head of presidential personnel, the PPO, the Presidential Personnel Office. I mean, can you imagine? He had just turned 30. He had never hired anybody in his life. He had never fired anybody in his life. And he was put in charge of the most important personnel department in the federal government. Responsible for hiring and firing cabinet secretaries. The Secretary of State, goes through PPO on the nomination before the nomination is put forward. The director of the CIA, all the way down to positions at NIH, and I mean all over the place. All the political appointees go through this office. And McEntee said, first of all, he basically fired everybody that was in that office. There's like staff of like 30 people that run that department. And he fired just about all of them and then brought in his friends. And most of these were kids in their 20s. At least two of them that I know of didn't have college degrees yet because they hadn't graduated. And they set out not to everybody was already hired. We were 3 years into the administration, but to go through and try to figure out who in the administration was truly loyal to Donald Trump and who wasn't. So they set out, they fanned out with questionnaires all the way up to, in some cases, cabinet secretaries, deputy secretaries on down, to ask a series of questions to gauge their true loyalty to Trump. And I'd make the comparison. That this is a little bit like the Red Guard in Maoist China, going through and, taking out the intellectuals and anybody that wasn't truly on board with Maoism, and the working class. It was these people were enforcing loyalty, and it was McEntee that engineered the decapitation of the Pentagon leadership just days after the 2020 election. Not really appreciated at the time, his role. I've documented it chapter and verse. One of my favorite documents, it's in the book, of McEntee, was the rap sheet that he put together for Mark Esper.
Yeah.
He got Mark Esper was the defense secretary, obviously, and he was fired. But before he was fired, McEntee had to put together like all the horrible things Esper had done. One of them was he vowed to keep the department apolitical. Can you imagine that? Trying to keep the Department of Defense apolitical? He opposed the Insurrection Act to be used to send active duty forces to put down riots in American cities. He turned the department, to deal with Russia. He advocated inclusion and tolerance in the ranks of the military. He took steps to take the Confederate flag down at U.S. Army bases. I mean, on and on and on. I mean, Esper has now used this, I think, as his bio.
Yeah, pretty good one.
So McEntee is I think it tells the story to a degree of what happened on January 6th. In many ways, he's kind of the guy you don't know who made January 6th possible, because he was calling out anybody that would stand in opposition to whatever Trump was going to do. He couldn't get everybody out in time. And there were people, who kind of helped save the day within that administration who wouldn't go along with what Trump was asking. But that's because McEntee didn't have time to get rid of them yet. Now McEntee is working on Project 2025 out of the Heritage Foundation, which is to lay the groundwork and, most importantly, the personnel that would populate a second Trump administration.
Yeah, and then guardrails are gone completely at that point. I mean, it's what they're working on. I mean, that's what I think is so important about the book, is that it takes you through step by step and very well documented exactly, who is like McEntee, what they were doing and where they are now. And sort of and a drift towards fascism too, that I think is, we don't talk about it that much in terms of and use that word, but it's definitely, or authoritarianism. It's to take power and I think that threat is we just don't talk about it. And the one thing I do want to,
can I interrupt just for 1 second on
sure,
that?
of course.
I think that's an important point. When a friend of mine who grew up in Albania, which was the most closed and most oppressive country in the among the Soviet satellite states. When he read what I wrote about McEntee, he said, "I recognize McEntee. I know McEntee." I mean, this is the East German Stasi. Yeah. This is the beginnings of, because it's all about enforcing complete and total loyalty. And it comes with kind of a bit of a absurdist sheen. I mean, McEntee right now is also working very hard creating a thing called The Right Stuff, which is a dating app for Trumpians. So you can go and ensure that it's like a Tinder for the Make America Great Again crowd. I mean, it's and he literally, in hiring, and I document this too, some of the people he hired were Instagram influencers, attractive young women that he wanted on, who were, so it's like, it doesn't have that darkness and that starkness of like the Stasi, but the mission is precisely the same, which is we can't have any dissent.
No, and it's interesting. I mean, how just throughout the book, there's little vignettes. I mean, that sort of emphasize not only, that people like Merkel see this.
Right.
I think it was a great part of the book where there's just a little vignette, but where she comes back and says to Trump that he's, and maybe I'll let you relate the story, but I think it kind of gets to this.
I mean, the amazing thing about that story is it's a story that Trump relayed.
Right.
And I heard about it from a very senior figure in the Congress, Republican Trump ally, who couldn't believe it. That Trump, because Trump had a terrible relationship with Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, had clearly nothing but contempt for him. So he wanted people to know, at least this Republican, she's amazed by me. I mean, she tells me that she's never seen anybody get crowds as big as me. I mean, she says in all of history, there was only one other person who got crowds like me. And this Republican Trump ally is like, who she's talking about, right? And it kind of seems that Trump does know exactly who she was talking about and was kind of overjoyed by the comparison.
Yeah. No, and there's plenty of those throughout the book and other quotes from Bannon and others. Again, these are people closest to him. It's almost like the book, when I'm reading it, it just seems like it was almost written for Republicans. Like if every Republican could read this thing and see that it's Republicans saying, and the people closest to him and what they say about him, I understand what you mean about, steal this book, which is good reason to have you on the podcast and to get people spreading the word that we need to get people to dip into this thing.
And was that Jerry Rubin or Abby Hoffman who wrote Steal This Book? I might have, it was one or the other.
Yeah, I'll have to think that through.
Abby Hoffman. Good
Abby
job.
Hoffman. Okay.
You were right
the
first time.
Good.
Yeah. But the thing I'm still trying to grapple with, I understand, by the way, why Republicans are going, particularly office holders, are going along with this. I mean, I don't understand it, I mean it that way, but I get the fear of being thrown out of office because you're going to be primaried by a cult, that kind of thing. What I'm not, and so why they enable and empower him, even when I think a lot of them, per your book, get where this could go. The thing I still don't fully grasp, and as a reporter would love to hear what you think, is why does the press have us? And this isn't going after the press. I mean, look, I think it's got to be a really tough thing to do to cover this guy or to interview him. But is it normalcy bias that we all don't want to? It can't be true. I mean, how long it took for anybody to say, call a lie, is there some hope that this is going to break through in terms of a narrative that's, defends against this, or is it just, no, it's not, the press isn't going to get it in time? And it's not a hit on them. It's more from your point of view. There's obviously some problem that it's not being communicated. I do think some of it, my own view is some of it is he's with fake press and everything. He's made the point, anything you write is a lie. Don't believe it. So
it's really insidious. Yeah.
So how do you have any thoughts about how we get out of that, or how to combat it?
First, in terms of trying to understand the problem you've identified, this is a really tough series of choices for any individual reporter or any news organization. I think that when he left the White House in disgrace, and then you had the impeachment trial that took place shortly after he left the White House, I think once that was done, there was a sense of, let's ignore this guy. We probably, and I hate, by the way, referring to the media as the whole thing, but allow me to do it just for a second. The media writ large probably, gave him way too much oxygen and way too much attention when he first started running for president. And I think that there was a sense, now that he's gone, let's not pay attention to him. Certainly that was the approach actually at Fox. I mean, you could have watched Fox throughout 2021 and not known that Trump was still around. There was he was not interviewed, he was not talked about. But that was, insofar as there was discussion of Trump, it might have been the debate over having a commission to investigate January 6th, the eventual formation of the committee, those things, but not about Trump and not about whatever the hell he was doing at Mar-a-Lago. He was off Twitter for a good chunk of that first year. He didn't even have a true social. And there was we're going to ignore this guy. He doesn't matter anymore. And I think that has been kind of a bias, not in a political bias sense, but of how we look at this. He just, did he say something crazy? Okay, let's ignore it. Let's not give it any oxygen. Right. But now he's the front runner for the Republican nomination. You can't ignore this anymore. This is what it's all about. I think we're starting to see a change in that. And my book came out, and it was almost like he was trying to amplify and prove the message of my book, because my book comes out and then he goes on Veterans Day and says, actually it was before the book came out, but it was after that first chapter about Waco was published in the Atlantic. And he refers to his opponents as vermin, using term right out of the Third Reich. He starts calling the January 6th prisoners hostages, as the hostage drama is playing out in Gaza, by the way. So and he does that Univision interview where he talks about, prosecuting a whole range of people, if he gets back in power. So I think that all these have been mechanisms to force attention in the coverage of this Republican primary on this stuff. You can't just cover debates that he skips.
Right.
You can't just cover the criminal cases, which are hugely important, but they're not about what he's going to do if he becomes president again.
No, I mean, that's right. And he does seem to be, well, you do talk about this, that he's, I can't remember the quote, Alex, you may have it, about becoming more and more detached from reality. And it does seem that that's happening with increasing speed here again. So, I mean, do you see, one of the things I wanted to, I think there's just as somebody who looks at polling data and things, I think there's a chance here that somebody like Nikki Haley could get some momentum and not necessarily stop him from being the nominee. I think that's probably still pretty much of a lock, given as Steve Bannon said, he'll be a leader of the party as long as he can fog up the mirror in your book. Yeah, that was a great quote you got out of him. But what I'm saying is, if she were to defeat him, let's say in New Hampshire, does that pierce him? I mean, you've followed him all this time. You've written about all this stuff. Does that in some way, even exacerbate? I mean, like he starts lashing out. I mean, what would an event like that do, and how you think he would react?
I think that, first of all, we saw him lose Iowa in 2016.
Yeah.
We saw him lose some other key races. Wisconsin, he lost really big, if you remember. there were moments that he lost and he was able to kind of like pivot and move. He never really acknowledged he lost any of those things, but he moved on to the next battle. I think that Trump is more volatile than he was then, and he was quite volatile then, obviously. And I do think he is more divorced from reality, more paranoid, more. And this, I think, is largely new. Hell bent on vengeance and retribution.
Yeah,
I think that's a kind of a. There's always he always wants to go after his enemies, but it's kind of blows over. But I think this is different, and this is now the defining theme of his campaign in a way that it never was at all. So I think that if he loses in Iowa or New Hampshire, I think that he reacts in a way that is potentially very self-destructive to his own campaign and to the Republican Party. And I think this race is not over. And I remember being around you during a campaign that people thought was over, and then turned around rather quickly in 2004, I believe it was. I've seen Iowa and New Hampshire.
Thanks for bringing that.
Yeah,
one
I'm
up,
sorry, man. I don't remember the details. I don't know if you have any.
Of all the ones you could have picked,
just to pick a. But I think that the combination of the fact that people have not focused and truly taken the time to understand what it would actually be like if he got back into power, and people, just by the fact that they're starting to vote, are paying attention now. And his own behavior, I think we will see more erratic than even anything we saw in the White House or in that 2016 campaign. So I don't think it's over. And I think I'll give you another thing on this. I think that if Nikki Haley, who is probably the most likely to actually beat him if he loses the nomination, if she finds a way to win, I love this, and Nikki Haley does this. Well, look, I beat Biden by 10 points. Well, guess what? If Nikki Haley actually beats Donald Trump and wins the Republican nomination, it's not going to be a neat little Nikki Haley versus Joe Biden race. Donald Trump is going to burn down the Republican Party and burn down Nikki Haley. And I don't know if he will end up running as on his Patriot Party that he wanted to start in 2021, but it's going to be scorched earth. He will never acknowledge that he lost. He will never concede he lost. He will make the stop the steal argument that he made in 2020 on I think a much larger scale, and that becomes a huge issues for whoever that poor soul is, Nikki Haley or whoever, who actually manages to beat him if they do.
Well, I've actually had that similar theory about how this would play out. I don't see how it's one of the big crazy things about everybody getting in the race against him is even if they could get through the fantasy if they win the nomination, how they get to the point where he's on the stage with them, putting his hands up in the air, raising them together and urging on behalf of, for the good of the party and for the good of the nation, please join me, my MAGA friends, in supporting Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis or whoever. It's like just it's not going to happen, man.
This will make Ted Kennedy and Jimmy Carter in 1980 look like a love fest.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll make that look like 1968 in Chicago.
Well, Jonathan, look, I think we're running out of time here. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to leave us with, or something I didn't mention that you thought was important to get across about the book? Want to give you a shot at it?
Look, first of all, thank you for having me on. I would just say that the part of the book that I think is like the single most heartfelt thing I've ever I've written is the conclusion of this book. And I would encourage people to take a look at that. It's not part of the book that has, some of the, breaking news details that's in the rest of the book, but it kind of gets at, to me, what is really the stakes here. And as I said, I really want people to read this and understand the message. So if you've already read it, please take your copy and give it to somebody else to read. Spread the word on this. And again, thank you very much. I've always admired you, and I've learned a lot from you about politics over the years. So it's great to be on that trippy show.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. same from you and reading all your, not just the books, but your reporting is always, as someone said, tough, fair, and brutally honest. But anyway, thanks, Jonathan, for coming on, and thanks everyone for listening to That Trippy Show. Jonathan, where can people find you?
I'm on Threads. I'm on X at John Karl, and that is JONKARL.
Cool. And we'll put a link to the book where you can find it. And I really do urge people to read it, a couple copies for your friends, and pass them on. It's really, really an important read. Thanks again for listening. This podcast will always be free with support from our advertisers and is part of Resolute Square. Check out the latest at resolutesquare.com/trippy. Please subscribe to That Trippy Show and leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, Jonathan.
Resolute Square.